He almost tore my throat out, and I still turned the volume up. That's the kind of decision you make when you're either very brave or very stupid. I've never been sure which one I am. The studio sits inside what used to be a machine parts warehouse on the edge of the river. Rusted beams. Concrete floors that sweat in winter. The only light comes from industrial strips I wired myself. Cold yellow, the kind that makes everyone look slightly haunted. The walls are padded in matte black acoustic panels, swallowing echoes and secrets alike. The air always hums, not loudly, just enough that you feel it behind your ribs. Kane stood in the center of the room like he didn't belong to gravity. Tall, lean muscle under a black jacket. Ash blonde hair tied low at the nape of his neck. The scar along his jaw cut sharp against pale skin. His eyes were too light. Silver gray, almost translucent. Omega. Former military asset. The file I wasn't supposed to have called him behaviorally unstable during forced shifts. In person, he looked controlled. That was worse. "You sure this won't knock me unconscious?" he asked, glancing at the subwoofer stack like it had personally offended him. "If it does," I said, adjusting the frequency dial, "you won't remember it. So technically no trauma." He snorted softly. Dry. Almost amused. "I like that sound more than I should have. I'm not here to be sedated," he added. "Good. I'm not a pharmaceutical company." I stepped behind the console. My fingers hovered over the touchscreen. The waveform glowed faint blue against the dark. Infrasound isn't something you hear. It's something your body confesses to. A pressure shift. A suggestion under the skin. Kane rolled his shoulders once, tension crackling in the air. "Baseline first," I said. "Just breathe." "Easy for you to say." I started the stabilization sequence. The room changed. Not visibly. But the air thickened, like the atmosphere before a storm. The frequency dipped below human perception, below even most wolf thresholds. Kane went still. Too still. His jaw tightened. His fingers curled slowly into fists. "It feels," he began, and then sucked in a sharp breath. "Like something's pulling on my spine." That wasn't in the projections. "Stay with it," I said. Though my pulse had begun to trip over itself. His pupils blew wide. The shift hit like a detonation. Bones cracked with a wet, splintering sound. His back arched violently. A growl ripped from his chest, half human, half not. Claws tore through skin at his fingertips, dark and curved. The scent of ozone and iron flooded the room. Shit. I killed the sequence. Nothing changed. He wasn't fully wolf. Not human, either. Stuck in that catastrophic middle state they warn you about in every integration seminar. His head snapped toward me. Recognition flickered. Then hunger swallowed it whole. He lunged. The impact knocked me flat. The back of my skull hit concrete hard enough to blur my vision. His weight pinned me down, breath hot and shaking over my face. One claw slammed into the floor inches from my throat, carving a clean line through cement. I could see the tremor in him. The war between programming and instinct. "Kane," I breathed. "Idiot." My hand slid blindly across the floor until I found the portable override control. The harmonic override was experimental, untested, theoretically capable of interfering with dominance impulses. Theoretically. I pressed it. The air shifted again. Lower, deeper. A countercurrent threading through the chaos. Kane's body jolted. His snarl faltered. The claw near my throat trembled. His gaze sharpened, confused now, not feral. The fur receded slowly, painfully. Bones realigned with soft, sickening clicks. His weight sagged. And then he collapsed on top of me, human again. For a moment neither of us moved. His forehead pressed against my shoulder. His breath came ragged, uneven. His hands, bare hands now, fisted in the fabric of my shirt. "What did you do?" he whispered. I swallowed. "I tuned you." He went very quiet. And then, against my collarbone, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not submission. Not fear. Relief. His breathing steadied. Mine didn't. Because under the terror, under the logic, under the data and the equations, I had felt it. The surge. The terrible, intoxicating clarity of holding the frequency that could stop him. Or break him. And when he lifted his head slightly, those silver eyes focused, fully there now, I realized something worse. He wasn't looking at me like prey. He was looking at me like I was the only sound in the room that made sense. I didn't expect him to come back. Men like Kane don't return to the scene of near-homicide experiments. They disappear. They burn bridges. They hunt the scientist. Instead, at 11 the next morning, there was a knock on the metal warehouse door. 3 sharp raps. Measured. Controlled. I opened it. Daylight leaked through the cracked skylights overhead, slicing the studio in pale beams that cut through dust and quiet. Kane stood there in the same black jacket, hair still tied back, eyes clearer than they'd been the night before. "You're either very brave," I said, stepping aside, "or extremely bad at self-preservation." He walked past me like he owned the space. "You're still alive," he replied. "That suggests it worked." That wasn't an answer. The warehouse felt different in daylight. Less haunted. More exposed. The equipment hummed softly, a low mechanical breath under the floor. Kane stopped near the center of the room again, but this time, he didn't brace. "I didn't shift last night," he said. I froze halfway to the console. "What?" No blackout, no partial, no claws through drywall. His tone was neutral, but something in it was tight. "First time in 3 years." The words landed heavier than I expected. 3 years of losing himself. 3 years of waking up to damage. "Sit," I said automatically, gesturing to the reinforced chair near the speakers. He didn't argue. That surprised me more than the rest. I brought up the neural frequency map on the main screen. A web of moving lines pulsed in faint blue. "This," I said, tapping the display, "is a transformation cascade. Every wolf has a baseline oscillation. Call it a personal station. When stress, pheromonal spikes or emotional overload push it past threshold, the body shifts." He studied the screen, head tilted slightly. "And mine?" I overlaid his data from last night. The pattern jittered, fractured, jagged in places where it should have been smooth. "Yours looks like someone spliced in interference. Artificial aggression spikes, instability loops." His jaw tightened. "They did." "Of course they did." I swallowed the anger that wasn't mine to claim. "My stabilization sequence aligns your oscillation back to baseline," I continued. "It reinforces the core frequency. Think of it as phase correction." He exhaled slowly. "So, I'm a broken radio?" The dryness in his voice almost made me laugh. "You're not broken," I said. "You're badly tuned." That earned me the smallest reaction, a flicker at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close. I lowered the room output to a subtle band, barely there. The lowest harmonic layer. The air thickened gently. Kane's shoulders dropped a fraction. His hands, resting on his thighs, unclenched. His breathing evened out. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. Like something inside him had stopped bracing for impact. And then I noticed something else, my own pulse. It had steadied too, beating in the same rhythm as the waveform. As him. I glanced at the monitor. The calibration error dropped by 2%. That shouldn't happen without system feedback. Kane opened his eyes slowly and looked at me. Not wary, not feral. Focused. "You feel it too," he said. It wasn't a question. And for the first time since I built this thing, I didn't have a logical explanation ready. "I feel," I admitted carefully, "that you're the only one who listens." It started with the rain. Not dramatic rain, not cinematic. Just that steady metallic drizzle that makes everything in an industrial district look like it's dissolving. We were locking up for the night. Neon from the closed auto shop across the street bled pink and blue across wet asphalt. Kane stood a few steps ahead of me, scanning the empty lot with that quiet, predatory awareness he couldn't seem to turn off. "You always look like you're expecting a sniper," I said, fumbling with the warehouse padlock. "I usually am," he replied calmly. Comforting. I slid my backpack over one shoulder. The portable harmonic module sat inside it, a compact battery-powered version of the studio system. I'd started carrying it after yesterday. Paranoia is just pattern recognition with better marketing. The first van rolled in without headlights. Black. Unmarked. Too clean for this part of town. Kane stiffened. "Eli," he said quietly. The second van blocked the exit. Doors slid open. 4 men stepped out. Tactical jackets. Gloves. Efficient posture. And around the neck of one of them, a suppression collar. My stomach dropped. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered. Kane stepped subtly in front of me. The man in the collar didn't look unstable. He looked vacant. His eyes were focused but distant, like he was listening to something only he could hear. A frequency. Of course. Another figure emerged from the first van. She didn't hurry. Tall. Tailored gray coat despite the rain. Dark hair pulled into a precise knot. No visible weapons. No visible emotion. Dr. Mara Voss. I'd seen her name in buried research grants. Helix Dynamics. Behavioral Stabilization Initiatives. Her gaze settled on me first. "Mr. Mercer," she said. Voice smooth and measured. "Your work is remarkable." "That's usually not how kidnappings begin," I said. Her lips curved slightly. Not quite a smile. "We're not here for violence. We're here for collaboration." Kane shifted his weight. I felt it before I saw it. The tension in his muscles, the subtle widening of his stance. "You brought a suppressed omega as an example," he said flatly. "That's your idea of collaboration?" Dr. Voss turned her eyes to him. "Asset 47 volunteered for regulatory enhancement," she replied. "Public safety requires structure." The man with the collar stood perfectly still. Too still. "You're using frequency dampening," I said, my pulse accelerating. "You reverse engineered it." "Not quite," she said. "We lacked precision." "You solved that?" The four tactical men moved forward in unison. "Don't," Kane warned, voice dropping into something deeper. They didn't listen. I yanked the portable module from my bag and hit the activation switch. The air buckled. Low-frequency resonance, spread outward like a pressure wave, not strong enough to shatter concrete, but enough to disrupt neural thresholds. The suppressed omega stumbled first. His collar flickered. The tactical men winced, hands flying to their ears. Kane moved. Fast. Controlled. Not feral, focused. He disarmed the nearest man with brutal efficiency, slamming him into the van door. Another tried to grab me. I ducked instinctively, heart hammering as Kane's elbow connected with the man's jaw. Dr. Voss didn't flinch. She simply watched. "Interesting," she murmured. The module whined under strain. I adjusted the harmonic layer, fine-tuning it to Kane's baseline. His movements sharpened. Cleaner. Less reactive. More deliberate. The suppression collar sparked and died completely. The omega it had controlled collapsed, gasping. "Retreat," Dr. Voss said calmly. The men obeyed instantly. The vans pulled away, tires hissing over wet asphalt. Rain swallowed the silence they left behind. Kane stood breathing hard, eyes bright but lucid. "They knew," I said, my hands shaking around the device. "They know," he corrected. Across the street, a security camera pivoted slowly in our direction. Dr. Voss's final look lingered in my mind, not anger. Assessment. We weren't an accident. We were a prototype. And Helix had just decided we were worth acquiring. Kane moved into my studio like a storm deciding to rent space. He didn't bring much. A duffel bag. A toothbrush. A presence that made the air feel charged even when nothing was happening. "There's a couch," I said, pointing toward the narrow futon tucked behind a partition of sound panels. "It's not comfortable." "I've slept in worse places," he replied. "I'm sure you have," I muttered. The studio wasn't meant for living. It was concrete and cables and humming equipment. The kitchen was a metal counter, a single burner, and a fridge that groaned like it regretted its life choices. But after the Helix attempt, neither of us pretended this was optional. "They'll come back," I said that evening, leaning against the counter as rain tapped softly against the cracked skylight. "Yes," Kane agreed. He didn't sound afraid. He sounded prepared. That might have scared me more. The first night was quiet, too quiet. I fell asleep on a thin mattress behind the mixing console, the portable harmonic module within reach. At 3:17 a.m., I woke to a sound that didn't belong in a building. A low, strangled growl. Not loud. Contained. I sat up slowly. Kane was on the couch, back arched slightly, hands gripping the cushions. His breathing was uneven. Sweat darkened his shirt. His eyes were shut tight, like he was fighting something inside his own skull. No equipment was running. No frequency. Just him. "Kane," I said carefully. His fingers twitched. The tendons in his neck stood out sharp beneath his skin. "Don't," he forced out between clenched teeth. "Don't turn it on." I wasn't planning to. His jaw trembled. A faint ripple moved under his skin, subtle but wrong. I walked closer. Slowly. "Hey," I said, crouching a few feet away. "Look at me." His eyes opened. Silver blown wide, not feral yet, but on the edge. "Focus," I told him. "On what?" "On you?" That's what I almost said. Instead, I did something stupid. I spoke. Not commands. Not instructions. Just steady, grounded words. Breathe in. Slow. There's no threat here. No scent trigger. No spike. You're safe. My voice dropped lower without me meaning it to. Measured. Even. His breathing began to match it. Inhale. Exhale. His shoulders trembled once. Then stilled. The ripple under his skin faded. A minute passed. 2. Finally, he let out a shaky breath and leaned back against the couch. Silence settled around us. I realized I was still kneeling close enough to feel the heat of him. You howl like a malfunctioning ambulance, I said lightly. His head turned toward me. For a split second, confusion flickered. Then, a quiet, breathless huff of laughter. That was not a howl, he muttered. Sure. It was very dignified. His eyes softened. Not weak. Not small. Just unguarded. You didn't use the system, he said. No. How? I hesitated. I think your body responds to pattern, I said slowly. Maybe it doesn't just need frequency. He studied me. It needs someone steady, he said. The words hung between us. Too honest. Too close. The studio hummed softly around us, wires and metal and concrete holding the sound of our breathing. Shared walls. Shared air. Shared vulnerability. And for the first time since Helix showed up, I didn't feel like we were waiting for something to break. I felt like we were learning how not to. I've always trusted numbers more than people. Numbers don't pretend. They don't soften the truth to protect your feelings. They don't smile at you while hiding intent. They just pulse on a screen and tell you what you did. The studio was quiet that morning. Kane was in the kitchenette making coffee. Black, no sugar. The kind that smells like burnt decisions. I sat at the main console, the monitors bathing the room in cold blue light. I replayed the recording from the warehouse attack. Waveforms layered across the screen. Baseline oscillation, harmonic correction, dominant suppression. I isolated the harmonic override. The experimental band. The one I'd used when Kane was inches from tearing my throat open. The graph dipped sharply when I activated it. Aggression spikes flattened. Neural dominance markers, subtle electrochemical patterns tied to territorial assertion, dropped below threshold. I leaned back slowly. That wasn't just stabilization, that was dampening. I overlaid last night's data from the near-shift episode. No equipment. Just my voice. His breathing had synchronized. Cortisol markers lowered. Neural agitation decreased without mechanical intervention, which meant something uncomfortable. The system worked, but it worked best when paired with relational input. Connection. I zoomed in on the override band again. The frequency didn't just correct phase variance. It suppressed initiative response. In plain language, it quieted the part of him that pushes back. That fights. That resists. My stomach tightened. Behind me, Kane walked in, mug in hand. You're staring at the screen like it insulted your mother, he said. It might have. He leaned one hip against the console, watching the lines move. What did you find? I hesitated. You remember how you said it didn't feel like healing? Yes. You were right. His expression didn't change, but his posture shifted. Subtle, ready. The override doesn't just stabilize, I said. It suppresses dominant impulse patterns. In English, it makes you less likely to resist. Silence. Rain tapped faintly against the skylight again, softer than the night Helix came. So, he said after a moment, voice steady. You can turn me down. I can turn anyone down, I admitted. The truth felt metallic in my mouth. Helix hadn't reverse engineered this. They'd barely scratched the surface. I'd built something more efficient, more precise. Something capable of reaching directly into a wolf's nervous system and quieting it. Public safety. Regulation. Order. Dr. Voss's voice echoed in my head. I stared at the screen. At the clean, obedient line the override produced. Am I building a cure? Or a leash? Kane stepped closer. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of him again, grounding and distracting all at once. Can you also turn it off? He asked. The question wasn't about the system, it was about me. Yes, I said quietly. I can. His eyes held mine for a long second. Then don't forget that, he replied. He pushed away from the console and walked back toward the kitchen. The monitors kept glowing. The data kept pulsing. Unbiased. Accurate. Terrifying. Because the numbers were clear. I hadn't just learned how to stabilize the beast. I'd learned how to silence it. The roof of the warehouse wasn't meant for lingering. It was gravel, rusted vents, and a view of the river slicing black through the city. But at night, when the traffic softened and the sky turned deep blue instead of polluted gray, it felt like neutral ground. Kane sat on the low ledge, boots planted, elbows resting on his knees. The wind tugged at the loose strands of his ash-blonde hair. From here, he didn't look dangerous. He looked tired. I leaned against a vent pipe, arms folded. "You were right," I said. "About the override." He didn't look at me. "I figured. You said it didn't feel like healing. It didn't." Silence stretched between us. Not uncomfortable, just heavy. Finally, he spoke. "They called it adaptive conditioning." I turned slightly toward him. "In the program?" He nodded once. "They said omegas were too reactive in combat scenarios, too tied to instinct, too volatile." His jaw flexed. "So they adjusted us." "Adjusted," I repeated. "They ran neural modulation drills, sensory overload, frequency exposure, chemical dampeners. They rewired impulse response." He said it evenly. Too evenly. "Rewired how?" I asked quietly. "They amplified aggression triggers, suppressed empathy markers, installed behavioral overrides." Installed. The word made my skin crawl. "They didn't just train you," I said. "No." His gaze finally shifted to me, silver catching faint city light. "They tuned me." My chest tightened. "That instability in your frequency map," I murmured. "The fractures. That's not because I'm wild." His mouth twitched in something bitter. "It's because they spliced combat routines into my transformation cascade." The wind picked up, sharp against my face. "So when you shift." "I'm fighting layers," he finished. "Instinct, programming, memory. Sometimes I don't know which one is mine." That was the part that landed hardest. Not the violence. Not the experiments. The doubt. "I don't want to lose myself," he said, softer now. "If I go fully wolf and the military imprint wins." He exhaled. "I don't know what I'd become." He wasn't afraid of hurting strangers. He was afraid of not recognizing himself. "That's why you came back," I realized. "Partly. And the other part?" He stood slowly. Now we were level. Closer than before. "You don't look at me like I'm a weapon," he said. My heart made an unhelpful decision to speed up. "That's because I see the waveform," I replied lightly. "Not the headlines." A faint smile ghosted across his mouth. "Your voice," he said after a moment. "Last night. It cut through the noise. That's not how acoustics works." "I'm not talking about acoustics." The air between us shifted. No equipment. No harmonic field. Just proximity. He stepped closer. Close enough that I could see the faint scar tissue along his collarbone. Close enough to feel his warmth in the cool night air. "If your system can silence the wrong parts of me," he said quietly, "promise me something." "What?" "If I ever stop pushing back, if I ever get too calm, I won't let you disappear," I said before he could finish. His eyes softened. That almost smile again. He reached up, hesitated, then let his hand hover near my jaw. Not touching. Just close. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to breath and gravity, and the space between us. I leaned in, and the warehouse security light below flickered on with a harsh click. We both froze. Footsteps echoed faintly in the alley. Reality snapped back into place. Kane stepped away first. "Timing's terrible," he muttered. "I'll send a complaint to the universe," I said dryly. But as we headed back toward the stairwell, one thing was painfully clear. His form wasn't unstable because he was savage. It was unstable because someone had tried to overwrite him. And I was the only person who could hear the difference between the beast he was and the one they made him. Helix Dynamics did not operate out of a warehouse. They operated out of glass. Their headquarters rose 30 stories above the river. All steel lines and mirrored panels that reflected the sky like they owned it. The lobby smelled faintly of ozone and expensive cleaning solutions. No dust, no rust, no exposed wiring. Everything controlled. I should have refused the meeting. Instead, I walked in. Kane didn't like it. "Don't go alone," he'd said that morning, tension threading through his voice. "It's a corporate office, not a war zone." "They're the same thing," he replied flatly. He waited outside in the parking structure anyway. Close enough, just in case. Dr. Mara Voss met me in a conference room that overlooked the city, floor-to-ceiling windows, polished table, a single carafe of water placed with mathematical precision. She wore charcoal gray again, no jewelry, no wasted motion. "Mr. Mercer," she said, rising smoothly. "I appreciate you coming. You blocked our exit with 2 vans," I said. "This feels like the polite version of that." She didn't bristle. "If I had wanted you detained," she replied calmly, "you wouldn't be standing." "Fair." I sat. "So," I said, folding my hands on the table. "What do you want?" "Partnership." She tapped the tablet in front of her. A projection flickered to life above the table. Neural waveforms, familiar and unsettling. "My waveforms, modified. You've achieved phase-specific stabilization at a level we've struggled to replicate," she said. "Your harmonic override is particularly elegant." That's a strange compliment for someone who tried to abduct my test subject. "We attempted to assess risk exposure," she corrected. "By collaring him?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Regulatory collars reduce volatility in high-threat omegas. He's not a threat. He has been trained as one." There it was. Not cruelty. Classification. She swiped again. The projection shifted, rows of oscillation patterns stacked in grids. "We have already begun broader implementation trials," she said. "Our model reduces uncontrolled shifts in public environments by 32%. My stomach tightened. "You're already using frequency suppression. Controlled modulation," she said. "For public safety." The room felt smaller. "You're flattening dominance response," I said. "That affects autonomy." She tilted her head slightly. "Autonomy without structure leads to instability," she replied. "You've seen what happens when emotional spikes trigger transformations in crowded spaces. We prevent casualties." "At what cost?" She met my gaze directly. "Order has a cost," she said. "Freedom does too." For a moment, I saw it clearly. She wasn't a villain. She was afraid. Not of wolves. Of chaos. "You could refine this," she continued. "With funding, a proper lab, legal backing. You could eliminate uncontrolled transformations entirely." Eliminate. The word echoed. "You're not trying to cure instability," I said slowly. "You're trying to standardize it." She folded her hands. "I believe," she said, "that a society functions best when its most volatile members are guided. Not left to their impulses. Guided. Like a leash." I stood. "And if they don't want to be guided?" Her expression softened, not with sympathy, but conviction. "Then they prove why guidance is necessary." Outside the window, the river moved freely through the city, cutting its own path. I thought of Kane. Of fractured waveforms. Of silver eyes fighting to stay his own. "I'll consider your offer," I said. Dr. Voss nodded once. "Please do," she replied. "Before someone less principled acquires your work." That wasn't a threat. It was a warning. When I left the building, Kane stepped out from the shadows of the parking structure. "Well?" he asked. I exhaled slowly. "They want to save the world," I said. He studied my face. And they think you're the problem." I told myself it was research. That's how you justify dangerous curiosity. Helix had planted a seed, and I hated that they had. I needed to know the full range of what the override could do, what it was already doing. Not in theory. Not on projections. On him. Kane stood in the studio again, but this time there was no tension in his posture. No attack vans outside. No visible threat. Just us. "You're sure?" he asked, watching me adjust the console. "It's a reduced amplitude," I said. "Barely above ambient. I want to isolate the suppression markers." He didn't argue. That should have been my first warning. I initiated the soft harmonic layer, lower than the emergency override, smoother, woven carefully into his baseline pattern. The air shifted almost imperceptibly. Kane blinked once. Then his shoulders relaxed. Not subtly. Completely. The line of his spine softened. His jaw unclenched. His breathing settled into an unnervingly even rhythm. "How does it feel?" I asked. "Quiet," he said. "Not strained. Not relieved. Just quiet." I watched the monitor. Aggression markers dropped. Cortisol levels dipped. Neural dominance impulses flattened. His silver eyes looked at me without their usual edge. "You want me to stand?" he asked. I frowned. "Why would I?" "You usually tell me to brace, or focus. I'm not telling you to do anything." He nodded slowly. Okay. He stayed where he was. Still. Compliant. My skin prickled. Kane, I said carefully, how do you feel about this? He considered the question for a moment. It's easier, he said. There's no pressure behind my ribs. No static. If you want me quiet, I'll be quiet. The words landed like a punch. I swallowed. That's not what I want. He tilted his head slightly. What do you want? The question should have felt open. Instead, it felt obedient. Like he was waiting for direction. My pulse began to spike. I glanced at the screen again. His waveform was too smooth. Too symmetrical. No fluctuation. No friction. It wasn't stability. It was suppression. Kane, I said, stepping away from the console. Argue with me. He blinked. About what? Anything. Tell me I'm wrong. He paused. You're not, he replied evenly. That did it. I cut the frequency. The room snapped back into ordinary air. Kane inhaled sharply, like surfacing from underwater. His shoulders tensed. His gaze sharpened. What did you just do? He demanded. I stared at him. I turned it off. His jaw flexed, something fiercer returning to his expression. Good. He ran a hand through his hair, grounding himself. I didn't like that, he added after a beat. Neither did I. The monitors behind me still displayed that perfect flattened line. So clean. So controllable. My hands were shaking. Helix had called it guidance. Public safety. Structure. But I had just watched a man who fought through military conditioning stand there and wait for my instructions. Not because he trusted me. Because I'd lowered the part of him that resisted. Am I building a cure? Or a leash? The answer had just looked at me and said, if you want me quiet, I'll be quiet. And for the first time since I built this system, I was afraid not of what Kane could become, but of what I could. He didn't leave immediately. That somehow made it worse. The silence after I cut the frequency felt heavier than the suppression had. Kane stood in the center of the studio, shoulders tight again, eyes sharp, alive. Good. Alive was good. Alive also meant angry. You tested it on me, he said finally. I opened my mouth. Closed it. Yes. His laugh was short and humorless. Of course you did. It was reduced amplitude, I said quickly. I needed to understand the range. On me, you were already responding to it. That doesn't make me a lab rat. The word hit hard. That's not fair, I snapped. Isn't it? He stepped closer. Not threatening, but intense. You said you didn't want me quiet. But you wanted to see if you could make me that way. That's not the same thing. It feels the same. The air in the studio thickened again. Not with frequency this time, just emotion. I didn't tell you to do anything, I said. You didn't have to, he shot back. You flattened the part of me that pushes back. I flinched. Because that was exactly what the data showed. I was testing a variable, I said, falling back on the safety of logic. That's how research works. I'm not a variable. I know that. Do you? His silver eyes locked onto mine. You're scared of what I can become, he said quietly. You're scared of what any of us can become. That's not. Isn't it? He gestured vaguely toward the equipment. You built something that can stop a wolf mid-lunge. You think that's just curiosity? The memory flashed, his claw inches from my throat. The surge of power when the override hit. The clarity. Yes, I admitted, the word coming out rougher than I expected. I'm scared. The confession hung in the air. I've seen what uncontrolled shifts do, I continued. In public spaces, in tight corridors. I've seen the aftermath reports. Chaos doesn't just hurt wolves, it hurts everyone. So you'd rather preempt it, he said. I'd rather prevent it. By deciding who gets to be loud. I rubbed a hand over my face. That's not what I'm trying to do. But it's what you can do. The distinction mattered. To me. He exhaled slowly. I spent years with people telling me, it was for my own good, he said. That they were improving me, stabilizing me, making me safer. His gaze softened, but not in forgiveness. In the end, I couldn't tell which thoughts were mine. I swallowed. I don't want to do that to you. But you could. That was the problem. I could. I'm not Helix, I said, more sharply than I meant to. No, he agreed. You're worse. The words cut deeper than they should have. At least they admit they want control, he continued. You tell yourself you're helping. My chest tightened. That's not fair. It doesn't have to be. He stepped back. The distance felt immediate. Do you know what scares me? He asked quietly. I didn't answer. That one day I'll wake up and I won't care that you turned me down. The sentence landed like a crack in glass. You think I want that? I demanded. I think you're afraid of chaos, he said. And I am chaos. The honesty hurt. I'm afraid of losing people, I shot back. I'm afraid of not being able to stop it. And you think you can stop everything? Silence. Because that too was true. Kane picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. Where are you going? I asked. Out. That's not an answer. It's enough of one. He paused near the door, hand on the metal frame. You don't get to decide what I am, he said without looking back. Even if you can hear the frequency. The door shut behind him. The studio hummed softly, indifferent. I stared at the console. At the clean, obedient override band. And for the first time, the room didn't feel like a lab. It felt like a cage. And I wasn't sure who I'd built it for. He left. And I told myself he'd come back. That's what people do when the argument isn't finished. I was wrong. The warehouse was too quiet without him. No restless pacing. No low, almost subconscious growl in his sleep. Just the hum of cooling fans, and the distant drip of water in the pipes. I didn't hear them come in. That was the first mistake. The second was assuming Helix preferred conversation. The door behind me clicked. Not slammed. Not forced. Clicked. I turned. Two men in dark suits stood near the entrance. No tactical gear this time. No visible collars. Professional. Mr. Mercer, one of them said calmly. Dr. Voss would like you to join us. I declined. You reconsidered. I didn't reach the portable module in time. Something sharp pricked the side of my neck. Cold spread outward in a blooming wave. The room tilted. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was the waveform still glowing on the monitor. Perfectly stable. When I woke up, it wasn't in a van. It was in a lab. White walls. Seamless glass. The kind of sterile that feels curated. My wrists weren't restrained. That was intentional. A demonstration. Dr. Voss stood a few feet away, hands folded neatly. I apologize for the theatrics, she said. But time is not a luxury. Kidnapping is inefficient, I muttered, pushing myself upright. My head felt heavy, but clear. You could have sent a calendar invite. She ignored that. Come, she said. She led me through a glass corridor, overlooking a wide chamber below. I stopped walking. There were at least 20 wolves in the room. Some alpha, some omega, some beta, all standing. Perfectly still. Eyes open. Expressionless. My stomach turned. Above them, suspended in a lattice of steel and speakers, was a frequency array. Massive. Industrial. You scaled it, I whispered. Dr. Voss watched the chamber, not me. We refined it, she corrected. Your principles accelerated our development. They're conscious, I said. But they're not moving. They are regulated, she replied calmly. Dominance impulses suppressed. Aggression thresholds neutralized. Transformation triggers dampened. One of the wolves blinked slowly. Too slowly. They didn't consent to this, I said. Consent, she repeated thoughtfully, is a complex concept when public safety is at stake. You're flattening them. We are preventing escalation events. My pulse spiked. You're overriding autonomy. She finally turned to me. Mr. Mercer, last year alone there were 14 fatal transformation incidents in metropolitan zones. Civilians died. Children died. We can stop that. At the cost of what? Volatility. I looked back at the chamber. At the rows of living bodies reduced to obedient silhouettes. The waveform from the overhead system pulsed in steady controlled bands. I recognized the harmonic structure. It was mine. Just amplified. They don't look stable, I said quietly. They look safe. I felt it then. The scale of it. This wasn't about Kane. It wasn't about one unstable former soldier. It was about turning an entire species into manageable data. Dr. Voss stepped closer. With your refinement, she said softly, we could eliminate uncontrolled transformations entirely. Eliminate. I watched one of the wolves' fingers twitch faintly, an almost rebellion swallowed by the field. You're not trying to understand them, I said. We're trying to prevent chaos. My throat felt tight. And suddenly I understood. Helix didn't need Kane. They didn't need the beast. They needed the man who knew how to silence it. And they already had him. Helix didn't lock me in a cell. They locked me in a lab, glass walls, soft lighting. A workstation already configured with my interface preferences. As if I had simply transferred offices instead of being abducted. The message was clear. You belong here. I sat at the console, staring at the massive frequency array suspended above the main chamber. The wolves below were still standing in regulated silence. The system pulsed in steady intervals, clean, controlled, devastatingly precise. Dr. Voss had left me alone. Trust, or calculation. My pulse hadn't stabilized since I'd woken up. Kane would have noticed that. The thought hit harder than it should have. He doesn't know where you are. Unless... A low vibration rippled through the floor, subtle at first, almost environmental, then it sharpened. Not mechanical. Alive. The security panel near the door flickered. Somewhere in the lower levels, metal groaned. Dr. Voss's voice came through the intercom, calm but tighter than before. Containment breach in Sector C. My breath caught. Sector C was below. Another tremor shook the glass corridor. Not chaotic. Focused. Like something moving with purpose. The system monitors around me spiked, not in suppression metrics, but in external biosignature interference. One waveform appeared on the screen. Familiar. Fractured. But coherent. Kane. He'd found me. How? I whispered. The doors at the far end of the corridor buckled inward with a violent crash. Security personnel scattered. Shouts echoed. And then I saw him. Not half-shifted, not fractured. Fully transformed. Massive silver-gray fur catching the sterile light. Muscles coiled beneath it like living steel. His eyes, those impossible bright silver eyes, were clear. Present. Not swallowed. He moved through the corridor without frenzy. Every strike precise. Every motion deliberate. Guards were disarmed, not shredded. Pushed aside, not destroyed. Control. He wasn't lost. He was choosing. Dr. Voss appeared beside me, watching through the glass. Impressive, she murmured. You underestimated him, I said. We underestimated your influence. The system reacted to his presence. Suppression fields flickered as his baseline frequency clashed with the array. He reached the glass barrier separating the control room from the chamber floor. Our eyes met. Even in wolf form I could see it. Recognition. Not instinct. Not programming. Me. He lowered his head slightly, then slammed his shoulder into the reinforced panel. The glass spiderwebbed. Alarms blared. The suppression field stuttered. I moved without thinking. My fingers flew across the console, isolating his waveform and shielding it from the primary dampening frequency. If Helix flattened him now, they'd erase this control. I wasn't letting them. The barrier shattered on the second impact. He stepped through the opening, glass crunching beneath heavy paws. The room felt charged. Alive. He shifted mid-stride. Bones folded inward, fur retracting in controlled ripples. He dropped to one knee in human form, breath heavy, but steady. Not feral. Not fractured. In control. Kane, I breathed. He looked up at me, eyes bright and focused. You didn't think I'd let them keep you, he said. Not a growl. Not a snarl. A promise. And for the first time since Helix took me, the fear in my chest loosened. He hadn't come as a weapon. He'd come as himself. Alarms screamed overhead, but inside the control room everything felt eerily precise. Too precise. Security teams regrouped below. Reinforced shutters began sliding down over corridor exits. The main suppression array recalibrated automatically, adapting to the breach. Dr. Voss didn't panic. She stepped toward the central console and placed her palm on the biometric panel. The room locked. Kane, I said under my breath. He stood a few feet away, shoulders squared, breathing steady. Human. Focused. Ready to move. Then the air changed. A deep vibration rolled through the chamber. Not mine. The array shifted into emergency override. Below us, the wolves reacted. Not violently, not loudly. They simply stopped. Every muscle stilled. Every blink froze mid-motion. The field intensified. Kane flinched. His fingers twitched. I saw the ripple under his skin again, subtle, suppressed. Dr. Voss turned to me. You can stabilize this, she said calmly. The system needs refinement. Your refinement. I'm not helping you suppress them, I shot back. You already have, she replied. The words hit with surgical accuracy. On the central screen, a new interface loaded. My interface. They'd built it into the main system. Activate manual modulation, she instructed. I won't. The vibration deepened. Kane's jaw clenched. He was fighting it. But this array was stronger than anything in my studio. Mr. Mercer, Dr. Voss said quietly, if you do not intervene, the automated field will escalate to prevent transformation cascade. That escalation is less nuanced than your design. Less nuanced. Meaning harsher. Meaning damaging. I looked down at the wolves in the chamber. One of them, a young Omega, barely more than a teenager, stood rigid, eyes open but vacant. Another's knuckles were white, fingers locked mid-clench. They were conscious. Trapped inside stillness. My throat tightened. You want to prove autonomy matters? Doctor, Voss continued. Then protect them from system shock. My hands hovered above the console. They were shaking. Not from fear of her. From the weight of choice. If I didn't touch it, the automated field might spike unpredictably. If I did, I'd be complicit. Kane, I said softly. He met my gaze. Do it, he said. The words surprised me. What? Do it, he repeated, voice strained but clear. Not for them, for you. He trusted me. That was worse. I placed my hands on the interface. The waveform filled the screen, clean, efficient, terrifying in its reach. I initiated manual modulation. The array pulsed brighter. The suppression field stabilized into a smoother band. The wolves below exhaled almost in unison. Still standing. Still quiet. But no longer on the edge of neurological rupture. My pulse hammered in my ears. The system responded eagerly to my adjustments, like it had been waiting for my touch. You see, Doctor, Voss said softly. You're not the problem. You're the solution. I looked at the chamber. At rows of living bodies held in obedient suspension. At Kane, muscles taut, fighting not to drop under the weight of the field. My fingers trembled over the next command input. This wasn't just a machine. It was leverage. And it was listening to me. The question wasn't whether I could control it. The question was whether I would. The system was elegant. That was the worst part. Clean architecture. Adaptive response loops. My harmonic math embedded into something massive enough to blanket an entire chamber of living bodies. It wasn't sloppy control. It was precise. And it was waiting for my next command. Below the glass floor, 20 wolves stood suspended in regulated stillness. Their waveforms scrolled across the monitors in neat columns. Flattened peaks. Suppressed dominance spikes. Smoothed aggression thresholds. Compliant. Kane remained upright beside me, jaw clenched, shoulders rigid. The field pressed against him, but he hadn't dropped. Not yet. Dr. Voss watched with quiet expectation. Complete the refinement, she said. I stared at the central interface. The suppression band was anchored to a shared median frequency, a generic regulatory baseline. Efficient. Scalable. Impersonal. That was the flaw. It assumed wolves needed to be pulled toward sameness. I began typing. What are you doing? Doctor, Voss asked. Refining, I replied. But not the way she thought. I split the suppression band into individualized channels. The system resisted at first, flagging instability risks. I overrode the warnings. Each wolf's waveform was unique. Fractures, surges, subtle rhythms like fingerprints. I isolated them, mapped them, amplified their baseline signatures instead of dampening them. Mr. Mercer, Dr. Voss's voice sharpened slightly. You are deviating from regulatory protocol. Exactly. The array overhead shifted tone. Not louder, deeper. The chamber trembled faintly. What are you doing? She repeated. I'm giving them back their own frequency. I adjusted Kane's channel last. His waveform was still jagged, military splices embedded in his cascade, but beneath it there was a core pattern. Steady, resilient, the real him. I routed a harmonic reinforcement layer to that core instead of flattening the spikes. Kane, I said quietly. He met my eyes. His breathing was strained, but his gaze was steady. This is going to feel different. Different how? Like you're louder. A faint, crooked smile flickered across his face. Good. I triggered the rewrite. The suppression field fractured, not collapsed but redistributed. Instead of pressing down, the array began resonating outward, feeding each wolf's baseline frequency back into itself. The chamber filled with a low, layered hum. Below us, fingers twitched. Shoulders loosened. One of the wolves blinked, fast this time. Confused. Another took a sharp breath. The teenager Omega staggered slightly, catching herself instead of freezing. Dr. Voss stepped forward. "You're destabilizing them." "No," I said, adjusting gain levels rapidly. "I'm synchronizing them." The monitors shifted from flat lines to dynamic oscillations. Alive. Kane's body jolted once. A ripple ran under his skin, but it didn't explode outward. It settled. He inhaled deeply. Exhaled, and then he straightened fully. The field still pressed around him, but it no longer muted him. It matched him. "You're crazy," he said, voice hoarse but steady. "Probably." He stepped closer to the glass edge, looking down at the chamber. The wolves were moving now. Slowly. Testing limbs. Looking at one another in bewildered awareness. No frenzy. No collapse. Just presence. Dr. Voss's calm composure finally cracked. "You're amplifying individual volatility," she said. "That is precisely what we sought to contain." "Volatility isn't the enemy," I replied. "Uniformity is." The array groaned overhead as it redistributed load. "It wasn't designed for this. Neither were we." "Kane," I said quietly, meeting his gaze again. "If this spikes too hard, if it triggers your cascade." "I know," he said. "You could lose control." His eyes held mine. "I'd rather risk being myself than live quiet." The honesty of it cut through everything. I increased his baseline reinforcement by 2%. The system flared. The chamber lights flickered. Below, one wolf let out a startled bark, sharp, startled, alive. Not suppressed, not weaponized. Alive. The array screamed in mechanical protest as its suppression architecture destabilized. I kept typing. Rewriting. Redirecting. Not breaking the system, reprogramming it. If Helix wanted order through silence, they were about to hear what freedom sounded like. The system didn't fail all at once. It unraveled. Like a thread pulled too tight. The suppression architecture, built to compress difference into compliance, wasn't designed to handle expansion. The individualized resonance I'd triggered forced the array to do something it had never been programmed for. Listen. The chamber below pulsed with layered frequencies now. Not flat, not obedient. Alive. The overhead lattice of speakers shuddered as feedback loops began colliding. Warning lights flashed red across the control panel. "Containment integrity dropping," an automated voice announced. Dr. Voss stood rigid beside me, eyes fixed on the display. "You've destabilized the field," she said, not panicked, calculating. "I've removed the choke point," I replied, fingers flying over the interface. "The system can't hold a uniform dampening band against 20 distinct baselines." Below us one of the alphas staggered forward. Not collapsing. Moving. He flexed his hands slowly, as if rediscovering them. The teenage Omega looked around with wide, disoriented eyes, and then took a cautious step. Another wolf shifted partially, fur rippling across their arms before receding again. No frenzy. No explosion. Just reclaimed agency. The array screamed overhead, metal warping under stress. A speaker burst in a sharp crack, sparks showering down harmlessly. Kane stepped up beside me. The field still pressed against him, but it no longer crushed. His shoulders rolled once. Intentional. Controlled. "You're overloading the distribution grid," he said, eyes scanning the chamber. "I know. You've got maybe 30 seconds. I don't need 30. The system's core algorithm still tried to reassert median control, recalculating shared suppression values. I went deeper. Past the safety redundancies. Past Helix's regulatory constraints. I severed the shared baseline entirely. The array spasmed. The hum fractured into dissonant layers, then rebalanced into something raw and unfiltered. Individual waveforms spiked, then stabilized on their own. Not because I flattened them, because they adjusted themselves. The chain snapped. Literally. One of the suspension cables anchoring the upper lattice sheared loose with a metallic scream. The structure sagged to one side. Emergency power kicked in, then failed. The suppression field collapsed, not in a shockwave, in silence. The chamber fell quiet. Real quiet. 20 wolves stood breathing in unregulated air. Free. Kane closed his eyes briefly, testing his internal equilibrium. When he opened them, they were steady. Dr. Voss stared at the darkened array. "You've undone years of progress," she said quietly. "Progress toward what?" I asked. She turned to me slowly. "For a century, integration policy has struggled with volatility management," she said. "Every riot, every casualty, every headline pushes public trust closer to collapse. And you think trust is built on obedience? I think safety precedes trust." "No," I said softly. "Choice does." Below, one of the wolves looked up at us. Not vacant now, but alert. Present. Others began helping the disoriented ones to steady their footing. No one attacked. No one rampaged. They were shaken, not unleashed. Dr. Voss's composure thinned. But she didn't lash out. She studied the chamber like a scientist watching an experiment overturn her hypothesis. "They will blame us," she said finally, "if instability rises." "Or," I replied, stepping away from the console, "they'll realize instability was never the real threat." Kane moved to my side. The emergency lights flickered weakly overhead. Dr. Voss met my gaze one last time. "You could have built something extraordinary here," she said. "I did." The array gave one final metallic groan, and went dark. Below, the wolves began walking toward the exits on their own. Not as assets, not as variables. As themselves. And in the echoing silence of the ruined chamber, I realized something had shifted beyond circuitry. Helix hadn't just lost control of the system. They had lost the narrative. And that was harder to rebuild. The new space doesn't look like a laboratory. That was deliberate. It's a renovated storefront on a side street 3 blocks from the river. Exposed brick, warm lighting, actual plants that I'm trying very hard not to kill. The sign on the glass door reads, "Resonance Center, Voluntary Stabilization and Adaptive Frequency Work." No corporate logo. No mirrored glass. Just a bell that rings when someone walks in. We only see clients by appointment. And only if they sign consent forms that are written in plain language. No hidden clauses? Kane had asked the first day we opened. "Only the clause that says you're required to mock my handwriting," I replied. He'd smirked. That almost smile has become a regular occurrence. Today, an older alpha sits across from me in the consultation room. His shifts have been unpredictable since a workplace injury triggered chronic stress responses. He doesn't want suppression. He wants understanding. Kane sits beside him, elbows on his knees. "You don't need to flatten it," Kane says evenly. "You need to know what sets it off." The alpha nods slowly. I bring up his frequency map. Not on a massive overhead array, just on a tablet. I explain the peaks. The triggers. The breathing patterns that reinforce baseline stability. When I activate a soft harmonic layer, it's subtle. Targeted. Pre-approved. The alpha closes his eyes. "That's not invasive," he murmurs. "It shouldn't be," I say. When he leaves an hour later, he looks lighter. Not quieted. Aligned. Kane leans against the doorway, arms crossed. "You didn't try to optimize him," he says. "I'm rebranding," I reply. "Chaos, consultant." He laughs softly. The sound still does something to my ribcage. Later, when the center closes and the lights dim, the room feels warmer than the warehouse ever did. No hum of industrial suppression arrays. Just the faint buzz of the city outside. Kane stands near the window, watching traffic drift past in streaks of red and white. "You could have taken Helix's offer," he says quietly. "I know. You would have been very important. I already am." He turns toward me. There's no field active. No waveform pulsing in the background. Just us. I step closer. "You're not unstable," I say. He raises an eyebrow. "That's disappointing. I worked hard on my reputation." "You're responsive," I correct. "There's a difference." His gaze softens. "You're still afraid of chaos?" he asks. "Always." He takes one step closer. "Good," he murmurs. "It keeps you honest." The space between us narrows. This time there's no flickering security light, no alarms, no array overhead. Just breath. His hand brushes my jaw. Not hovering. Touching. Warm. Real. I don't lean in because a system told me to. I don't calculate cortisol levels. I don't monitor dominant suppression markers. I just move. The kiss is slow at first, tentative, testing. No pressure. No control. Just shared warmth, and the steady rhythm of two heartbeats adjusting to one another. When we pull back, his forehead rests lightly against mine. Still afraid? He whispers. Yes, I admit. He smiles. Good. The city looks different from the rooftop now. Not cleaner, not safer, just alive. Traffic hums below. Music drifts from an open bar window somewhere down the block. The river glints under streetlights like a restless vein. Kane leans on the ledge, hands in his pockets, wind tugging at his hair. We didn't dismantle Helix. We didn't rewrite integration policy, but we disrupted the narrative. Some of the wolves from the chamber found us. Others started community groups, public forums, open discussions about voluntary stabilization. The headlines haven't disappeared. Neither has fear. But there's conversation now. Choice. Kane glances sideways at me. So what's my frequency now? He asks lightly. I study him for a moment. Not the fractures. Not the splices left behind by military tampering. Just the steady core beneath it. The one you choose, I say. He hums softly in mock contemplation. Good answer. We stand there a while longer, watching the city move without needing to quiet it. For years, people thought the problem was the beast. Too loud. Too reactive. Too dangerous. But beasts don't fear their own sound. People do. I don't reach for a console. I don't calculate thresholds. I just listen, to the traffic, to the wind, to the steady rhythm of the man beside me. The beast never needed silence. It needed someone willing to listen.